Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck design video. Today I'm going to be re-recording my Latulla Keldon Overseer deck. This will probably be the last video I am re-recording, as I'm going to probably be tucking a lot of my decks away in a sort of time capsule. So I'm kind of wanting to just keep on progressing forward with the new ideas and whatnot. Latulla, well, first, I know that that's not actually how you pronounce her name. I just prefer Latulla because saying Latulla sounds kind of stupid. And if you don't like me saying Latulla, then you can eat a dick. Don't really care. But Latulla here, she is one of my favorite generals. This is either I think it's my second or third mono red general I've ever made. My first one was Jessica. This is probably my fourth or fifth general I've actually created as a deck. When I first saw her, I just fell in love with a few things, mainly because it's Brahms artwork, and I love Brahms work. But I also thought at the time that her ability to blaze people could work for general damage. I was very young, sorry. But I mean, it's just also a very fun general as well. At the time, I still, of course, love mono red, and there was not a lot of choices for a somewhat control-ish mono red general. There's just a lot of things about her. I also really enjoyed her story. She's the one who had, she commanded Greel to go kill Rain, which is Baron's wife, and then Baron also ended up just decapitating her when she got stuck. Pretty interesting story. I really like her background. I love her artwork. The card here, although, her ability is not very good. She's of the Prophecy Spell Legend, or like Spell Shaper series. Most of those were in Mercadian Masks, where each had an ability you tap and discard a card. The legendary ones from Prophecy, there's one of each color, require you to discard 2 cards. The abilities, although, are much, much better. The black one is most likely the best because it is an instant speed Mind Twist. The white one sees a lot of play because he is also an instant speed board wipe. That is just repeatable board wipe. He himself does not die. The blue one, while it has really cool flavor with the Grandeur Girl, it just doesn't do enough. Latulla here, although the green one's also fun for decks that like to make their creatures land or in response to people board wiping. Latulla, although here, is just a situational one. It is a blaze, essentially just a X and a red, X damage target creature player. Building around a general like this is not smart. There are better generals, but from the flavor standpoint, I'm always going to stick with her. For example, there is the Red Legend from Kamigawa that pays 1 and a red, and it just doesn't even tap, it just burns target creature player for 1. And if it dies, it exiles. You can do things like the Heartstone to reduce his cost, and you don't have to discard, you don't have to tap, so it's just a much better general. But this deck is built around her. This is a somewhat mono-red control deck. It is a Spellslinger deck. The entire design of the deck is built with the intention of burning the opponent, most likely with her, or with some gigantic X spell. So most of the deck is put up to get in range of the opponent burning. This is not good in a 40 life format, especially because some of the tools that she requires to function are obvious threats and will be dealt with very quickly. Now let's go ahead and set her over here and big through the deck. Being that this is one of my favorite decks, I spend a lot of time optimizing it, a lot of time testing it. This, although, is designed for multiplayer, so some things are just not that good. I'm playing mono red control. That should say enough, really. So first up we have the Vashino Heretic. He is great for early defense and destroying people's artifact accelerant. Again, helping get them in range since he burns. Pilgrim's Eye is really good because it's another deterrent. It throws up a chump blocker and replaces itself with the land. Burnished Heart is a card I've been taking out of a lot of decks. The option of ramping is great, but it's oftentimes not fast enough. The problem is this is, of course, an X general, X mana costing general, where we want as many lands as possible, so he's worth the stay. Same Sad Robot is probably the best ramp we have because it's chump blocker and ramps and draws. Stuffy Doll is kind of what this deck really wants to do. Some people would classify this as a Punisher deck, since a lot of the stuff in this deck deals with damaging creatures. Stuffy Doll is fantastic because it does that. It also is an indestructible chump blocker. The problem is, of course, if the opponent has flying or trample, it'll just run straight through him. Then we have Duplicant, which is really good removal. Then I am playing a big mana deck with lots of doublers, so most likely these guys will land. They may be the win condition, although they are not intentionally meant to be the condition. I usually prefer Ulamog because I like Indestructible and Destruction, although in this deck, Kozilek is more important because of the draw. That's actually it. There's not a lot of creatures. As I said, if you've seen my Mogus deck, you'll probably understand a couple cards coming up where I'm just trying to hurt creatures, but she requires us to discard 2 cards per activation. I don't like Wheel of Fate very much because it gives the opponents many chances to build up and sculpt their hands before it resolves, but I have to discard 2 cards that work her, so it's usually worth the cut. Wheel of Fortune is the normal one, and Reforge is another card I've been considering replacing in a lot of decks, but in this deck it is too important to have a full set of hand. There's a lot of X spells in this deck because I am doing a big mana deck. Disintegrate's a favorite because it may remove something from the game. Red Sun as well. Demon Fire as well. I like things that exile, and these 3 spells can hit a opponent, or I can just exile a creature if it dies. Chain Reaction is not a very good card. There's one enchantment in this deck that this works really well with, and because it's in the deck, Chain Reaction has stayed. If there is a better burn spell that wipes all creatures, it will most likely replace Chain Reaction. Bonfire is another really good. The problem is, again, this is multiplayer, so targeting one person. I honestly hate seeing Bonfire so early. If it's something before turn 5, I will almost bitch about it for the rest of the game because I saw it so early. Starstorm is fantastic. It's the Earthquake of the deck. Actually, I think Earthquake's in here too. But, I mean, it's an instant speed. I can't deal with a lot of flyers. I used to run the Indestructible Darksteel Gargoyle and the Indestructible Darksteel Sentinel in this deck as defense. They ended up just not being good enough, but something like this helps me answer the flyers. Same thing, Blast Axe is a 13 to all. Again, this is something that's usually targeting one opponent. The good thing is all these damage spells, there's that enchantment coming up. You can probably guess what it is, but these damage spells really work well with that enchantment. I really am not happy with Incendiary Command. It's a good card, but when you put this up next to all the other commands of the cycle, this is by far the worst. A wheel effect where I'm already discarding a card, I'm not going to get a full set. 5 mana costing Sorcery Speed Pyroclasm, 4 damage to an opponent's face. It just honestly doesn't do enough. But it is in there because of the possibility of 2 modes. That makes it somewhat situational, worth keeping. Grab the Reins is one of my favorite cards. I love Active Treason effects if you haven't noticed the playmat. This one gives me a possible entwine where I can, it's instant speed, which is good, but I can entwine, sack, fling, things like that. Radiate is the gimmick card of the deck. It's in here because someone gave this to me. They thought it matched Latulla's artwork, although it's from different sets. I just like the absolute shenanigans this gives you. This may do nothing. This may completely reset a board if someone were to try and tuck all non-land permanents. Literally just copies an instant or sorcery that targets something and gives it enough copies to target every legal target. It's ridiculous. I love ramping in this deck because I need the ramp mana for Latulla to actually function well. So this is usually held up for ramp. Same thing, Reiterate is one of the absolute best mono red cards you could run. It is a buyback Reverberate. We have Vandal Blast and Into the Core. Well, I guess not Into the Core. Into the Core is probably in here somewhere. Vandal Blast is the best artifact removal spell to date because I can pay 5 and destroy all artifacts I don't control. There's of course a combo with this and the Leyline, no, not the Leyline, the Myconocynth, where everything becomes an artifact and you can one-sided board wipe everything, including lands. Kind of a douchebag combo. I don't like running it. Price of Progress is a card that should be in more mono red decks. I don't mind taking 2 or 4 damage, but this can absolutely wreck someone. This can remove someone from the game. It's just a 2 mana instant, does 2 damage, or yeah, it does damage equal to twice the number of non-basic lands that player controls. So 2 damage per non-basic land, essentially. I think the best win I've had, I used to main deck the Fork effect that copied my own spell, and I could flash it back from the graveyard. It's the one from Dark Ascensions, Increasing Vengeance. I once cast this spell 4 times in a row. I cast it, while I was on the stack I copied it, while I was out on the stack I flashed it back twice more. I did about 80 damage to one person. So this is against situational. Against mono color, it's not going to do a lot. Against 2 to 3 color, or 5 color, this is going to kill them. Although putting these next to each other is a little awkward, because this also destroys all non-basics. I have a few in the deck, but this is more important to set the opponents back with my Gimmick General. Then, of course, All Is Dust is the best removal we have because I can't deal with enchantments very well. Talking about enchantments, let's go to them. I love Magus the Moon. Since this is a creature-like deck, I could not fit him in here. Blood Moon, although, is the original one. It does the best because it's enchantment, it's harder to remove. While there are things I like doing at instant speed, like tapping Latulla, some things are more important to like stopping counter spells or in a turn cyclonic rifts, things like that. And Price of Progress or Price of Glory really does that. Repercussions is the big enchantment of the deck. This is a fantastic card. Something like this in a Blasphemous Act can kill people because it redirects that 13 damage per creature up to their face. Let's set this over here because this combos with a lot of stuff. Leyline is here because I'm playing a burn deck. I don't want you gaining life. There are also things that prevent damage like Sword of Fire and Ice or Progenitus. This removes pro-red. I can't target it still, but it's still going to get burnt from global effects. Stranglehold is kind of the control-ish enchantment. While I do want to copy your search and your tutors and your ramp, I sometimes can't stop things like a tooth and nail. Pyrohemia is fantastic, especially with the stuffy doll. It's just a spamming burn spell. This is also really good because it mounts with this. Because if I do 1 damage to all creatures and players, this is going to net extra damage to that player. It hurts me as well, of course. Then we have the Furnace effects. I believe I am only running these 2. Gratuitous Violence is not worth running because it overly exaggerates her, and that you don't want to put too much attention to her ability there. She looks underwhelming. Usually from the beginning of games, people will read her and be like, that's a stupid general, and forget about her. But of course, I've been playing this long enough that everyone I play with knows about the deck, and they know how to answer to it. So these double damage, the important thing is I can kind of capitalize on that with some spells, specifically Repercussions. So say I Lightning Bolt somebody, that does 3 damage, or I Lightning Bolt their creature, does 3 damage. This could make it do 6 damage. If this is out, yeah, it's going to do 6 damage to the creature, but that's going to redirect damage to its owner, which means it's going to do 12 damage to its owner. So with just Dictate and Repercussions, 1 red mana from a Lightning Bolt does 12 damage to its owner. That's an example. Consider that with Latulla, or all the X burn spells in the deck, or the board wipes. That makes a very broken board state. Burning Sands is my way of kind of gaining a tempo. As you saw, I have very few creatures. I have lots of burning creatures, like creature destruction, so this will oftentimes set the opponent back. Same thing, I always suggest Aether Flash if you are running a deck with creatures and your general has higher than 2 toughness, because it will make their creatures very hard to stay on the battlefield. Again, this is something that just is a consistent damage source, so Repercussions makes them casting a creature a shock to the face. Repercussions is just one of the absolute best cards in this type of deck. I have recently been trying to put together a mono black deck that I cannot make up my mind on what I want to do. If there was a black version of this, then I would definitely run Kiku the Night's Flower, because that is just funny. The bad thing about running mono red is the absolute reliance on artifact support. Let's go through this. There's obvious ramp. I really need lands, so Wayfarer's Bauble is the best. But then I also have ones that can tap for some color. Mind Stone is a good one because it can replace itself. And there is an infinite mana combo in the deck, just one, where I can use this and the Rings of Bright Hearth to get infinite mana. I'll explain that shortly. There's the Thrawn Dynamo, again a big X spell deck, of course I like that. Expedition Map is here usually to get me Valakut. There's a handful of other non-basics. And Journeyer's Kite is a card I will always rant and rave on. If you do multiplayer, if your group is not like mega ultra competitive turn 3 wins, something like this is actually really good card advantage. We don't have a lot of draw. Latulla requires us to discard 2, so having an extra card in hand or just dropping lands every turn is always good. Rings of Bright Hearth, let's go ahead and talk about it now. Latulla is an X ability, it's an activated ability, so I can do it for a pretty big amount, but with Rings I can double it for just 2 extra mana. With this card, Basalt, while I can't double mana abilities, Basalt Monolith has an activated ability of untapping itself for 3 mana. So I can pay 3, double the untap effect, and in response tap it again. And it generates infinite mana with very little to activate. Obviously I like infinite mana because I can burn infinite things. And if I already have this online, I can also target 2 things with my infinite setup. But there's other things as well, planeswalkers and whatnot, that this works well with. Sculpting Steel is usually going to be a gauntlet effect. Those are coming up shortly. But it's also essentially just a duplicate of the best artifact on the battlefield. It could be a Soul Ring early. I will usually hold on this for a gauntlet, although. Bracers is really good again on Latulla. This one does not require an activation. It literally just equips her, and I can then use her ability for 2 targets, or the same target twice. I love keeping her safe. There is a few equipment in here. I try not to do this, but the Shroud, it means I can't equip her unless there's another creature to equip this to. But I mean, keeping her safe is just much more important. This does shut down a lot of stuff, like the Aether Flash and Duplicate, things like that. It's more important, although, to keep my things safe. I have very little ways of recurring things from graveyards. I'm not even running the Goblin Welder in this deck anymore. So this is just an absolute god save. Running top for smoothing the draws, making sure I hit lands. Then there's the gauntlets. These 3 cards double my mana. They are like a mana flare effect. I got to be careful with these 2 because they help everyone. This one only helps me. Again, I use the Sculpting Steel typically as a 4th version because when I start doubling my mana, Latulla tends to start burning for a lot. Now my draw tech, because drawing in this deck is very important. All 3 of these, Memory Jar, Mind's Eye, and Staff and Nen. Again, the Memory Jar is usually fun if you have a Goblin Welder, but I've been reducing the number of creatures in this deck. Now let's finish up. The only other permanent other than land is Koth. Koth is fantastic because he is a form of mana accelerant in mono red. Again, this is usually something you will want to use if you're running over 30 basics. If you're not running a lot of basics, he's not really that helpful. But let's talk about the lands. There are 39 lands in this deck. It is of the utmost importance that this deck has a landfall every single turn. Because, again, that is the fuel for her. Not a lot on basics. We are, of course, running Valakut and Terrain Generator. I love these 2 put together because it is like I can bolt people on someone else's turn. And it's colorless, so that gets around a lot of things. Of course, big mana deck, I want the 2 lands that tap for 2 colorless. These are situational, of course, requiring more than, or 5 lands and hurting me. This hurts with the Furnace of Effects out, of course. This one's a new one. It is essentially a 2-for-1, which helps me fix. So it's really good. And the rest of these are these arena lands. I took apart like a modern burn deck and also a black-red modern deck. And I had all these in there. I love these lands. These, I believe, are the first foil lands ever printed. So 39 lands total, that's a lot. But that's Latulla. This is not a competitive deck. I have put as much as I could in here to make this deck work the best it can. But being blatantly honest, this is not a good deck. There's lots of expensive cards in here, and the deck does try to function, and it does have its moments. But this general, limiting myself to her, is the fall apart of the deck. She requires me to discard. It is also an X effect. If you have interest in this style of deck, I would suggest the Kamigawa guy. He has a bigger body. He is, I believe, the same mana cost. You can do something with like the Heartstone and make his ability literally just pay 1 red instead of 1 in a red. And his Exile effect makes him really good creature control. Latulla here is literally, I'm running her because of the flavor. I love the card. I love Brahm's artwork. This is just a card I've been running in EDH for maybe 5-6 years now. A very long time. I haven't been doing EDH for very long, less than 2005, I think, is when I started. 6. Anyways, I haven't been doing EDH for nearly as long as I've been playing Magic. I've been playing Magic since Mirage. I fell in love with Latulla when they printed her. When I learned about EDH, I knew I wanted to build around her after I worked a few other decks. The problem is getting her to work. And there's a lot of cards in this deck dedicated to making her work, and they are situational, not really good elsewhere. That's really all I can say. This is a unique build. I would not suggest her if you have strong opponents. If you tend to have more fun, situational opponents, maybe they're all experimental decks, this would be an interesting build. But to be honest, the other spell shapers are better. The blue one doesn't do much at all. The black one is actually a very strong one because you can Mind Twist people very early, and Mind Twist is a very powerful effect. Magenta, the white one, is also a repeatable board wipe. So those 2 are actually very strong. I'm not trying to say that to ward people off from making Latulla decks. I know I'm a somewhat hipsterish kind of person, but I'm just saying that Latulla herself is not efficient. She's not very strong. You are discarding cards in a monocolor deck, a mono red deck, and mono red has a hard time with card disadvantage already. But from a flavor standpoint, this is a fantastic deck. Spellslingers, pseudo control, and mono red. It's just every single game is a blast to play this in. Of course, again, I've been playing her in many different variations. I've rebuilt this deck, taken it apart, rebuilt it, taken it apart, rebuilt it over the past 5 years, probably longer. And all my opponents know exactly how to deal with this because they've all seen this deck many times. If you deal with the mana doublers, then you've dealt with the deck because I will have a hard time catching up. And it's an X-Spell deck. It's a burn deck in EDH. Any kind of life gain, it will just set me off. Something like a Loro, can't deal. But it's still a fantastic deck to play. If you have unique generals, subpar, I don't want to say that, generals that are not as powerful as they ought to be, then definitely share. I love unique generals. I try to play the most obscure generals possible. I happen to have a passion for a few of them, especially Latulla. But yeah, any feedback, definitely let me know. Again, I'm going to try and stop re-recording decks. I'm just going to let the video sit and idle. Because a lot of my decks I'm going to be tucking away in a pseudo time capsule thing. I'm going to have a hard time doing that with Latulla because I always enjoy playing her. She's just one of my favorites. I may make a secondary Latulla deck, may take it a different approach instead of burn control. May just make a good stuff red deck, I don't know. But of course, any idea is always welcome.